again, everyone. I know it's been a minute. Welcome back. I have been back from my trip for a while now. Started my new job, and we are going to get into chapter 10. I'm going to see how much I can get through. Let's start. It's called the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. I think this is a fascinating chapter. I hope you guys do too. All right, so the first section is called Too Many Smiths. To tell the story of Manson properly, as I'd argue Bugliosi never did, you've got to familiarize yourself with a dauntingly large cast, as it is clear by now. I don't know about you, but there's a lot of Charlies, a lot of names to keep straight, and it's like you almost need a little chart to keep track of it all, or a spiderweb chart like Tom O'Neill had. When I was preparing to turn my aborted premiere story into a book, I realized just how frustrating it was to keep everyone straight, to tell the narrative in a way that gave its major players their due without getting mired in details. Because, in a sense, the details were everything. The lacunae and the silences and seemingly irrelevant detours in Manson's life made it clear that he was far more a product of his times and his surroundings than something as outrageous as the helter-skelter motive would have you believe. That motive makes it seem like Manson and the family lived in a vacuum. But during their formative year in San Francisco, by most accounts, they were part of the zeitgeist. To understand that zeitgeist, I had to deal with the sheer proliferation of names, hundreds and hundreds of names. It's a confusing story to tell because it involves two Smiths and they ran in the same circles. Both were drug researchers with a sociological interest in the Haight-Ashbury youth scene. On top of Roger Smith, Manson's parole officer, there was David Smith, no relation, the charismatic creator of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. You wouldn't think that Manson, a Chari ex-con who had disdained conventional power structures, would spend a lot of time at a government-funded clinic, no matter how groovy its trappings. But Manson and the girls were at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic a lot. When they moved from the disused school bus into a proper apartment, he chose one right around the corner from the clinic. His involvement with the place and the extent to which it dovetails with both of the Smiths has been serially unexplored in popular writing on him. Because Bugliosi seemed to have no use for the Smiths, no one else did either. But having seen how crucial Roger was to Manson's development, I knew I had to dive into David's history too. Yeah, it's interesting the stuff that does get left out. Some people call that the dog who's not barking. I don't know if you guys have heard of that terminology before. All right, the next section is called Dr. Dave. David Elvin Smith grew up in the dusty farm community of Bakersfield, California, at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. When he moved to the Bay Area in 1960 to study at UC Berkeley, Smith was, by his own admission, a hick. He'd never traveled much beyond his backwoods town, and he lacked the political and intellectual curiosity that animated Berkeley's sophisticated international student body. Had it not been for his pushy peers, always scolding him for missing their sit-ins and marches, Smith probably wouldn't have noticed the dawn of the free speech movement on his own campus. Later, he liked to remember a teaching assistant who canceled class so he and the other students could head to a protest downtown. Smith refused to join. He wanted to study for an upcoming test. The TA told him he'd never get an A if he didn't go. Smith has been open about his louche behavior in this period. An inveterate womanizer and a binge drinker, he disappeared for days at a time on benders, nevertheless graduating at the top of his class. At the end of 1965, a debilitating blackout and a messy breakup led him to give up alcohol. Sometimes that's what it takes, right? You have to hit rock bottom before you change your ways. By then, Smith, a raffish, good-looking man of 26, he hit rock bottom at age 26. That's not good. Well, I guess it is good if he changed his ways for the long term, right? He was a postdoctoral student at UC San Francisco and the chief of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Screening Unit at San Francisco General Hospital. You know, that's interesting. A lot of times when I was in nursing school, we had to go to an AA meeting, and when we were in our psych rotation, and many, if not all, of the people that were leading those groups had been former addicts. And I guess that's a good way, if you can find a silver lining. You know, you have this debilitating issue and you use it to help people in the future. I don't know if that's what he's gonna do. I think so, but as we know, there's a dark side to all this as well. So let's see. Later, he remembered his curiosity flaring as his research collided with the city's cultural upheaval. I was injecting white rats with LSD in the lab, he said, and then I'd walk home past the Haight, where I'd see kids who were high on the same substance. That's interesting. He began to experiment with psychedelics himself, and he liked them. The lifestyle brought new friends and new politics. He and his friends tracked the burgeoning counterculture in the Haight, where some were predicting an influx of 100,000 young people in the coming year. 100,000 drug addicts doesn't sound like a good scenario to me. I guess maybe all of them weren't addicts, but it's a lot of people to infuse into the culture. Smith, who felt that healthcare was a right, wondered where the newcomers would receive medical attention and how they would afford it. He moved to Haight-Ashbury himself with plans to found a free clinic. When it opened at 558 Clayton Street in June 1967, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic was an immediate sensation. Staffed entirely by volunteers and unauthorized by the city health department, it treated hundreds of patients a day, offering non-judgmental care for those suffering from bad trips, overdoses, sexually transmitted diseases, and malnourishment, or for those who just needed a kind ear. Lines at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic sometimes stretched around the block, with hippies waiting to ascend the creaky wooden stairs to its second-floor office. Inside, loitering was encouraged. That's so interesting because it just doesn't seem like it seems like a good idea to help people that need it, but does it also enable them? I don't know. What do you guys think? The clinic did everything it could to advertise its psychedelic affinities. Exam rooms were painted in aqua and dayglow orange. One of them was wallpapered with a vibrant collage of peace signs, naked bodies, and hypnotic swirls. Even as Smith struggled to pay the rent and keep the cops at bay, he reveled in his creation. Few things so perfectly encapsulated the utopian ideals of the summer of love. I want to know how he paid for it. It wasn't regulated by anybody, and we all know that San Francisco is very expensive to live there, have real estate there, so they had to be getting their funding from somewhere, but where? I mean, it's expensive to have a medical clinic. You need supplies, you need medication. I mean, even if everyone's a volunteer, the real estate wouldn't be free, nor would supplies. So who is funding this? Is this guy independently wealthy and is funding it himself? I kind of doubt it. I highly doubt it. And I don't know. We'll start to see some things that, you know, if it is funded by the CIA, which I don't know if it was. I'm not saying it was, but could have been. They had to be getting their money from somewhere because nothing is free, as we know. As faces filed in and out of the clinic that summer, Smith and his colleagues befriended the repeat visitors, and the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic became a scene within a scene. It would be hard to tell the hippies apart with their long, beflowered hair, their upstart communes, their shifting legions of followers and leaders. But decades later, no one at the clinic had any trouble remembering Charlie Manson and his girls. Yeah, I would think they'd be pretty memorable just from the pictures and stuff that I've seen. Here's an interesting note about this clinic is, well, two things. One, I've read that Abigail Folger was one of the volunteers there, or that she worked there, but now I'm guessing that she was a volunteer because it sounds like everyone was. Was she an asset of the CIA? I don't know. She was more than just the Folgers coffee heiress, though, and a later victim of the Manson family. But also, I heard on it was on the Joe Rogan podcast, that not long after this book was published, like right afterwards, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic closed down, and it had been open since 1967. So, coincidence? I think not. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. All right, the next section is called Negate Your Ego. In 1971, David Smith published Love Needs Care, a memoir of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic's germinal years. I found it rife with details about Manson and the family, and about the very period that Bugliosi had omitted from Helter Skelter, the Summer of Love, when Manson, apparently at his most charismatic, began to attract followers and ensure their unconditional devotion. Yeah, you'd think that would be something that Bugliosi would have had to put in his book to give us the full picture. But I guess if you're the one writing history, then you can put in whatever you want. But still, seems like a pretty big omission to me. Better still, Love Needs Care had a few contributions from Roger Smith, offering his own appraisal of Manson. Now, I'm going to see if I can find this, because now I'm intrigued. I want to go find this Love Needs Care. It just says it was published in 1971. Was it a book? Was it an article? I don't know. I'll have to see if I can find it and report back to you guys about it. Okay, as invaluable as these portraits are, though, I called them into question when my reporting led me to doubt both of the Smiths. The more I reread certain passages, the more they seemed like gingerly public relations efforts. The Smiths had to make it clear that they knew Manson well and that they'd felt some sympathy toward him. There could be no denying that, given how often they'd been seen together. Oh, so did they write this kind of as their own version of what happened, in case someone came to them and said, hey, wait a second, these people spent a lot of time with you. Maybe it was their attempt to defend themselves. I don't know. But the book came 2 years after the murders, when both men had an interest in distancing themselves from that Manson, the murderous one, the metaphor for evil. Love Needs Care attempts the delicate task of elucidating the Smiths' relationship to Manson, while insisting that they had no idea that he and his followers would someday erupt into unconscionable violence. David Smith described the family's frequent trips to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, where Charlie's girls, as they were known around the halls, were treated for sexually transmitted diseases and unwanted pregnancies. Oh, so did they get rid of unwanted pregnancies in this clinic as well? Yeesh. The girls tended to Manson's every need, never speaking unless spoken to. They referred to him as Christ, or JC. When the family moved to an apartment on Cole Street, Manson began in earnest to reprogram his followers. Yeah, you don't really hear about them being apartment dwellers too often. It's mostly Spawn Ranch and the bus and the Beach Boys, one of the Beach Boys' house. Like, you don't really hear too much about this apartment. And David had an elaborate sense of Manson's tactics, although he never explained where he got it. Was it taught to him there? That's what we all really want to know. Did they teach him these tactics? Because someone did. And if he didn't learn them in prison, where did he learn them? Using a combination of LSD and mind games, Manson forced his followers to submit to unconventional sexual practices. Okay, so Manson's using a combination of LSD and mind games, and these guys are doing research into little white lab rats, he just said, when he was at Berkeley with LSD. So I tend to believe that they may have taught him this, and did they supply him with this LSD? I don't know. Seems like they might have. Smith wrote he would invoke mysticism and pop psychology as the acid took hold, saying, you have to negate your ego. Treating the girls like objects, he eroded their independence, turning them into self-acknowledged computers empty vessels that would accept almost anything he poured in. Before long, they obeyed him unquestioningly. Acid was unmistakably essential to the process. Manson's insistence on it sometimes put him at odds with trends in the Haight, David thought. Typically, hippies who dropped a lot of acid eventually moved on to speed. A schism grew in the scene. The acid heads, a phrase David claims to have coined, favored nonviolence, whereas the speed freaks, also coined by him, caused the rash of violence that destroyed the Haight's live and let live ethos. But Manson had an aversion to needles. He wouldn't use amphetamines. The family's drug pattern was effectively reversed, with Manson urging his disciples to relinquish speed and embrace acid. Weaning his recruits from amphetamines reduced the chance of interference with his induction process. Speed became a part of the family's lifestyle only later, David told me, when it came time to kill in LA. So, is that a convenient thing to be telling him? Because I believe that David Smith mostly used the whole LSD angle and not meth. So he's like, oh no, they weren't on meth. They were just on the love potion. I don't know if you want to call it that. The one that doesn't make you violent. Would that be distancing himself as well? I don't know. He heard this from Susan Atkins herself when she asked him to assess her mental health for a parole hearing in 1978. When they went to the South, they got very deeply involved in speed, he said. They got it from the Hells Angels. They were trading sex for speed, and Atkins thinks that Helter Skelter and the ultimate crime was a paranoid speed delusion. They all maintained that they weren't on speed, and they weren't on anything that night, but some accounts tell a different tale. Bugliosi kept any mention of the family's speed use out of the trial. David thought he understood why. It risked presenting mitigating circumstances for the prosecution, and the defense wouldn't want it coming up either. No one wants his or her clients to look like addicts. Both the Smiths have said that Manson's fear of needles made speed a non-issue, but obviously speed can be taken orally or snorted. Over the years, a smattering of evidence and first-hand recollections has suggested that the family used amphetamines more often than was suggested at the time. In a 2009 documentary, Linda Kasabian claimed that she and her companions each swallowed a capsule of speed before leaving for Cielo Drive on the night of Sharon Tate's murder. At the trial, she testified that she hadn't taken any drugs around the time of the murders. So it wasn't until a 2009 documentary that she said they had. So that's interesting. In books and at parole hearings, Susan Atkins also later copped to taking speed before the Tate murders. I mean, these people were high often, and they're known to be liars and criminals, so how do you even know what's true? How do you know? Tex Watson wrote that he frequently snorted it with the group, and that he too took it on both nights of the murders. Others added that the family kept an abundance of speed at Spawn Ranch toward the end of their time there, and that Manson himself wasn't above taking it, especially as he grew more paranoid. He would use it to stay up for days at a time, brooding on his delusions. Remember, Manson lived in the Haight because Roger Smith sent him there, thinking that its vibes would assuage the ex-con's hostility. And make no mistake, Roger did believe that Manson was hostile. In a short essay for Life magazine, published months after the murders, Roger offered his first ever insights about Manson. So wait, let's see when this was. In a short essay for Life magazine, months after the murder, so not too far after. He speaks of Manson here out of his extensive unofficial contact with him. The magazine noted, without describing the nature of that contact or any potential conflict with Smith's parole duties. Charlie was the most hostile parolee I've ever come across, Roger wrote. He told me right off that there was no way he could keep the terms of his parole. He was headed back to the joint, and there was no way out of it. Well, he wasn't back to the joint until something very, very detrimental happened, let's say. Roger would seldom write or speak about Manson again, wanting to distance himself from his most infamous client. When I first spoke to him in 2001, I was only the third reporter to do so. But his remark about Manson's hostility always stayed with me. I'd already seen, after all, how he characterized Manson in official parole documents as a well-behaved guy making excellent progress. So they're all over the place and totally contradicting themselves. Every single person involved in this. It's like hard to know what to believe because there's not much documentation of the time. There's just, these oral things, and some of them were way later. So I don't know if it's just hard to keep your lies straight and you revert back to the truth much later. I don't know. The disparity suggested that Roger had been willing to sweep Manson's hostility under the rug. Well, yeah, if you say he's making excellent progress and much later say he was the most hostile parolee you've ever had, that doesn't really click. In a passage he contributed to Love Needs Care, Roger did his best to support the idea that the bizarreries of the Haight suited an ex-con like Manson. So the bizarre world he was living in suited him. Daily LSD trips made him mellower, more thoughtful. He still had the slick duplicitousness of a con man, and he was still a master manipulator, but he was suddenly fond of vacuous self-help bromides, like if you love everything, you don't need to think about what bothers you. Roger Smith couldn't seem too credulous, so he made sure to note the messianic tilt of Manson's acid days, an oblique acknowledgement of Charlie's growing megalomania. David Smith mirrored the sentiment, writing that Manson's LSD trips replaced his underlying depression with a manic smile, that sometimes betrayed darker philosophies. David admitted that Manson began to develop a number of delusions as his involvement with LSD progressed. He fantasized about the Beatles ordaining him their musical equal. He imagined a judgment day when blacks would slaughter whites. Some of Roger's familiars, including his wife, couldn't understand his affinity for Manson. Yeah, but she didn't mind being a foster parent to his baby, so I find that interesting. Roger was pretty much in awe of Charlie's ability to draw these women to him, one said. Another thought that he was always kind of fascinated with the charming, charismatic sociopath. The question is, did he nurture that sociopathy? I don't know. He'll never admit to it, I'm sure. After Manson's role in the Tate LaBianca murders came out, Roger allowed that he had made an error in bringing him to the Haight. But at the time, the family enjoyed a remarkable kinship with Roger. They swarmed over Smith and often filled the clinic reception room, David Smith wrote, bringing operations to a standstill. I could see that. I mean, this band of filthy hippies comes in. I mean, I guess everyone there is probably a filthy hippie, but a big old group of them. Think about when you're in a doctor's office in a waiting room. Imagine a dozen people coming in and just taking over the place. It seems memorable, if nothing else. Roger didn't mind the adulation, in part, David claimed, because Charlie frequently offered him the services of his harem. Roger declined this offer. That's what he says, but did he? I don't know. Seems like a lot of people came under the spell because of the services of the girls. Among the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic alumni I spoke to, the understanding was Manson had visited the clinic on many occasions to see Roger for their mandatory parole meetings. Roger himself would later claim that the family simply came by out of the blue for no particular reason, and that they didn't begin seeing him there until after his duties as Manson's parole officer had ended. But where is the documentation? There's none, virtually none. In either case, something about the arrangement didn't sit well with me. One reason the clinic was free, after all, was that David, Roger, and their colleagues had received private and federal grants to conduct drug research there. There you go. There is the funding right there. Federal grants. And the FBI's federal, the CIA's federal. Was that part of it? I believe yes, but Do I have proof? No. The Smiths were both studying amphetamines and LSD, the latter being the crucial component in Manson's reprogramming process. How had an uneducated ex-con, someone who months ago had never taken acid and maybe never even heard of it, come to use the drug to such sophisticated ends? And wasn't it suspicious that he was coming to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic to see two people who were studying that very phenomenon, the use of drugs to control and change behavior? I mean, it seems like he had to have learned it from them. It's just too coincidental. I don't believe in coincidence, to be honest. They happen to be studying this, and there's all this federal funding. There's tons of LSD around, probably amphetamines too. And I mean, I don't know. The math adds up to me. At least one friend of Roger's had foreseen that it would be a conflict of interest. That's an understatement, am I right? I always thought there would be problems. Another noted, Roger had really made a career at that point in trying to help Manson. He was going to soothe the savage beast. Instead, the beast grew more savage than ever. Yeah, it sounds like he created a monster. I mean, if you look at Manson's history, I don't know, was he a monster to begin with? And he just saw the potential there? Did he not see that he could be creating a monster? I don't know. What do you all think? I know this is a little bit shorter of an episode. I'm experimenting. This is my new office. It's a little bit different than my old one. There's windows all around and I kind of share it. So we'll see how it goes. I think it's gonna go fine. I missed you guys. I was off. I mean, we went to Yellowstone at the end of last month and it's almost the end of this month. So I tried pre-recording a bunch and I know it was very spotty editing and posting, but just starting this new job, it's been very busy. It's been good, but very busy. So I've missed you guys. I am going to hopefully be able to do them closer together. We're going to hammer out this book and I don't know what the next one's going to be yet. I got an idea, but we're getting there. We're in chapter 10 and there's only 12. So it does seem like the ending chapters are a little bit longer than the beginning ones, but what do you guys think? Do you know anything? Have you ever heard of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic? What do you think about it closing right after? I don't know if you've probably not heard enough about it yet, but it closed literally right after this book came out. And I wonder if, I mean, who knows if any evidence was destroyed, if there even was. And it was so long ago that the Manson stuff happened that I would highly doubt that there would be any evidence there. But there's definitely not any now because it's closed. And I find that to be a pretty curious coincidence. Once again, I don't believe that coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidence. I don't know. I just don't. But anyways, I'm glad to be back. Yeah, I missed you guys. All right, that's going to do it for this one. You guys take care of yourselves. I will see you again very soon. Okay, bye-bye.